It was one of those chilly mornings that made people walk a little faster, hands tucked into their pockets, faces buried in scarves. The kind of morning where the world seemed too busy to notice small moments. But sometimes it's in those small moments that everything changes, when two strangers cross paths without knowing that their lives are about to shift. He stood in line at his favorite coffee shop, a cozy little place tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The cafe wasn't fancy. It had a few round tables, the smell of roasted beans in the air, and the soft hum of chatter from people escaping the cold. He came here almost every day before starting his freelance work, always ordering the same thing, a large cappuccino with an extra shot of espresso. It was his small ritual, a moment of calm before a day that was usually filled with emails, designs, and deadlines. That morning, the line was longer than usual. People were impatient, glancing at their watches, tapping their feet. He didn't mind. He liked watching people, the way everyone seemed lost in their own world, their faces telling silent stories. In front of him stood a woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She had a calm presence, though there was something tired about her eyes, like she hadn't slept well. She was dressed neatly in jeans and a blazer, simple but elegant. Her hair was tied back, and she held her phone in one hand, talking softly, her tone firm yet polite. She didn't seem like someone who came here often. She glanced at the menu board, as if deciding what to order even though she probably already knew. When it was her turn, she ended the call and smiled faintly at the barista. "One latte, please," she said. Her voice was steady, confident. She reached into her bag for her wallet, pulled out a card and tapped it on the machine. A second later, the machine beeped. Declined. The barista gave an awkward smile. "I'm sorry, could you try again?" The woman blinked, surprised. "Oh, sure," she said, trying again. Declined. She frowned slightly, checking the card. "That's strange," she murmured, half to herself. People in line started shifting uncomfortably. Someone sighed. Another person looked at their watch. She could feel their eyes on her. The quiet judgment, the impatience. Her cheeks grew warm. "I must have picked the wrong card," she said, fumbling in her bag. "I think I left my other wallet at home." The barista nodded politely, but the people behind her were clearly getting restless. It wasn't her fault, but it still felt embarrassing. She looked like someone who wasn't used to this, someone who probably never had to worry about her card not working. He watched the whole thing unfold. For a moment, he hesitated. Maybe she'd sort it out. Maybe she didn't want help. But then he saw the small tremor in her hand as she searched through her purse, the kind that came when someone tried hard to stay calm while feeling humiliated. He stepped forward. "Hey, I've got it," he said gently. "Don't worry about it." She turned, surprised. "Oh no, you don't have to. It's okay," he said with an easy smile. "It's just a coffee." The barista looked between them, unsure, then rang up the drink again. He tapped his card on the reader. Approved. The woman looked at him, clearly grateful but still embarrassed. "That's really kind of you," she said softly. "I'll pay you back. I promise." He laughed a little. "Please don't worry about it. It's just a latte." She smiled faintly, still a bit uneasy. "You're sure?" "Completely sure," he said. "Happens to the best of us." For the first time since stepping in, her shoulders relaxed. She nodded, thanking him again before stepping aside to wait for her drink. He ordered his coffee next and moved to the pickup counter. For a moment, they both stood there in silence, side by side, waiting for their names to be called. "Do you come here often?" she asked finally, maybe trying to fill the awkward silence. "Pretty much every day," he said. "It's my unofficial office." She smiled at that. "Freelancer?" "Yeah, graphic design. Sounds interesting," he shrugged. "It pays the bills most of the time." He smiled. "What about you? Work around here?" Her expression flickered. "Not exactly," she said, "just taking some time off." He didn't press. There was something in her tone that suggested it wasn't a topic she wanted to explore. Her drink was ready first. The barista called her name and she took her cup with a polite nod. She turned back to him. "Thank you again," she said sincerely. "Really, that was very kind of you." "Anytime," he said with an easy grin. "Just pay it forward." She laughed quietly, her eyes softening. "I will." And just like that, she was gone, walking out of the cafe into the cold morning, the doorbell chiming behind her. He watched her go, then shrugged and picked up his coffee. It was a small thing, barely worth mentioning. He'd done what anyone would have done, or so he thought. But that moment, as small as it seemed, had already left a quiet imprint on both of them. Outside, the woman walked briskly, the warm cup in her hand feeling oddly comforting. She couldn't remember the last time a stranger had done something like that for her, something so simple, so genuine. Most people who interacted with her these days either wanted something or were too careful around her. They knew who she was. They knew her name, her company, her status. But this man, this stranger, didn't know any of that. To him, she was just another person having a bad morning. It was strange, almost freeing. As she walked, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Another reminder of the world she'd been trying to step away from, even for a day. She slipped the phone into her pocket and kept walking, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of rain in the air. She thought about the man's easy tone, his lack of hesitation. He didn't help her out of pity. He just helped, and that small act pierced through the wall she'd built around herself over the past few weeks, the wall of stress, guilt, and exhaustion that came from being watched, judged, and misunderstood. A few blocks away, she stopped at a park bench and sat down, staring at the steam rising from her cup. The name written on it, Ethan, wasn't hers. The barista must have written his name since he'd paid for it. She traced the letters with her finger, smiling faintly. It felt personal somehow, like a reminder that there were still good people out there. At the same time, back in the cafe, he sat by the window, sipping his cappuccino and glancing at the notebook in front of him. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman. There was something about her demeanor, polite, calm, but distant, that made him wonder what her story was. She didn't seem like someone who'd forget a wallet. Maybe she just had one of those days. He opened his sketchbook, absent-mindedly doodling shapes and faces. But his thoughts kept drifting. He imagined her walking into an office, confident and collected. Maybe she was an artist, or a writer, or maybe someone going through something quietly like most people were. He didn't know that she wasn't just anyone, that she'd built one of the country's fastest-growing tech companies, that she'd been on magazine covers, panels, and news channels, that just weeks ago she'd stepped down from her position after a wave of public criticism for decisions she hadn't fully made alone. The world had turned her into a headline, and that morning she'd just wanted to feel human again, to buy her own coffee, sit in a cafe without being recognized, and breathe. But life had a way of weaving unexpected connections. She didn't forget the small moment that morning. In fact, it stayed with her the entire day. While running errands, she caught herself thinking about it again. The warmth in his voice, the lack of judgment in his eyes. It had been so long since someone looked at her like that, as if she was just another person in the world. That night, she sat at her kitchen counter, laptop open but untouched. The glow from the city skyline reflected off the glass windows of her apartment. Her inbox was filled with messages from board members and reporters still asking about her return, her decisions, her reputation. She closed it all with a sigh. Her gaze drifted to the coffee cup still sitting by the sink. The one with his name. She smiled again, shaking her head. Who was he, really? Just a kind stranger. Yet somehow he'd managed to make her day feel lighter. Meanwhile, he'd almost forgotten about it by evening. To him, it wasn't worth overthinking. People helped each other. It was what made the world bearable. But as he sat at his desk that night, scrolling through job listings and design requests, he thought of her again. The look on her face when her card declined, it wasn't pride exactly. It was something deeper, like someone used to being in control suddenly reminded of how fragile that control could be. He didn't know that their paths would cross again, that his small act of kindness, done without a second thought, would circle back in ways he couldn't imagine. He didn't know that the woman he helped wasn't just any customer having a bad day, but a person standing on the edge of a new beginning she hadn't planned for. For now, they were just two strangers who shared a moment in a crowded cafe. But sometimes one small act, one paid coffee, one gentle gesture, is all it takes to change the course of two very different lives. And neither of them had the faintest idea how much this one would matter. She woke up the next morning with a strange sense of calm. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was lighter than what she'd felt in weeks. The sky outside her apartment was pale gray, the kind that promised another day of drizzle, but she didn't mind. She made herself a cup of tea and stood by the window, looking out at the city slowly coming to life. Cars, buses, people hurrying to work. It was all the same as every other morning. But something about yesterday kept circling in her thoughts, that man in the cafe. It had been such a small moment, barely a few minutes, but it kept replaying in her mind. The way he'd smiled, the way he said, "It's just a coffee," like it truly didn't matter. In her world, things always mattered. Everything came with conditions, consequences, expectations. But that was just kindness. No strings. No reason. She sat at the kitchen counter and opened her laptop. Dozens of unread emails waited, most of them from the board, her legal team, and journalists still asking for interviews. Her company's name, her name, was still being discussed in business blogs and news outlets. Every article used words like scandal, controversy, reputation. It was exhausting. A few months ago, she had been on top of the world, respected, powerful, and admired. The company she had built from scratch had become a leader in the tech industry, known for innovation and efficiency. She had employees who looked up to her, investors who praised her, and media outlets that called her a visionary. Then everything changed overnight. A decision made by one of her executives, without her full approval, had led to a public backlash. Data privacy concerns, policy violations, and public outrage followed. As the CEO, she had taken full responsibility. She had stood in front of cameras trying to explain, trying to protect her team, but people wanted someone to blame. Her face had become that target, so she stepped down, voluntarily, at least on paper. But inside it felt more like exile. She had spent the past few weeks avoiding the spotlight, living quietly, trying to figure out who she was without the title. But it wasn't easy. Everywhere she went, she felt the weight of her name, even when no one recognized her. She had grown used to control, to knowing exactly what came next. Now her days were quiet, unplanned, and lonely. But yesterday felt real. That brief embarrassment at the cafe, followed by a stranger's warmth. It reminded her of what it felt like to be seen, not as a CEO, not as a name in a headline, but as a person. She smiled faintly and closed her laptop. Maybe it was silly to think so much about it, but still she couldn't help it. Meanwhile, a few miles away, he sat at his small desk staring at his computer screen. The apartment was quiet except for the soft buzz of traffic outside. He had been working late the night before, finishing a logo design for a small bakery. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep things running. He sipped his coffee and thought about the same woman. He didn't even know her name, but for some reason she'd stuck in his mind. There had been something about her expression, calm but distant, polite but weary. She didn't seem like someone who often needed help, and that made the moment stand out even more. He shook his head and smiled to himself. "You're overthinking a coffee," he muttered, turning back to his screen. The day went on like any other. Calls, edits, and deadlines. But by evening, he found himself walking past that same cafe again. The place was quieter now, the crowd thinner. He thought about going in, but didn't. Instead, he kept walking, hands in his pockets, thinking about how life worked in such random ways. The next few days passed quietly for both of them. She spent more time walking around the city, rediscovering places she'd once been too busy to enjoy. The small bookstore around the corner. The park where children played while their parents sat chatting on benches. She watched life moving around her, realizing how far she'd drifted from these simple things. One afternoon she went back to the cafe, not because she expected to see him again, but because it had become a small, safe space in her mind, the place where she'd been reminded that kindness still existed. She ordered the same drink, a latte, and when the barista asked for a name, she hesitated. For years, her name had carried weight. It opened doors. It got her into rooms where decisions were made. But it also came with whispers, expectations, and pressure. That day she just said Clara. It wasn't her full name, the one printed on magazine covers, but it was still hers. A simpler version. She sat near the window watching people come and go. For the first time in weeks, she opened her notebook and started writing. Not reports or strategies, but thoughts. Real thoughts. About life, about mistakes, about gratitude. Across the city, he was meeting with a potential client, a small startup looking for branding help. The meeting went well, but they said they'd get back to him. He'd heard that before. Freelancing was unpredictable, and sometimes it was hard not to feel invisible. Later that night, he sat on his balcony, looking at the lights of the city and wondering if he was doing enough. His parents lived in another state and he rarely saw them. He didn't have a big friend circle, just a few close people he spoke to every now and then. Life was steady, but it often felt small. Still, he tried to stay grateful. He thought again about that woman in the cafe. Maybe she was a reminder too, someone who showed that everyone, no matter how put together they seemed, had rough days. Days turned into a week. She continued her quiet routine, slowly finding rhythm in her solitude. She read more, cooked her own meals, and walked without a schedule. The noise in her head, the constant rush of business talk, deadlines, and decisions was finally beginning to fade. Yet she couldn't help but notice the emptiness that came with it. Success had always been her purpose. Without it, she didn't quite know who she was. One evening, she received an email from an old colleague. The company was preparing for an upcoming project and wanted her input. They were struggling with the new leadership, and her advice could help stabilize things. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it. But then she realized maybe she didn't have to disappear completely. Maybe she could still help quietly, without the spotlight. She agreed to meet them the next week. But that night, as she prepared her notes, she couldn't help but glance at the coffee cup still sitting near her window, the one she had kept from that day. It had his name written on it, fading now but still visible. She hadn't returned to thank him properly. She wanted to, not because she owed him, but because that small gesture had stayed with her longer than she expected. She wondered what kind of person he was outside that cafe, what kind of dreams he chased. Did he even remember her? Probably not. But still, the idea of finding him again crossed her mind more than once. Meanwhile, he was having a tough week. A client who had promised payment delayed it again. Bills were stacking up and the stress was beginning to wear on him. He wasn't angry, just tired. He sat in the same cafe one morning, his laptop open, trying to focus. When the door opened, he looked up out of habit. For a brief second, he thought he saw her again, but it wasn't her. Just someone with the same calm walk. He smiled at the thought and went back to his screen. That's the strange thing about life. It connects people in invisible ways long before they realize it. Her upcoming meeting was scheduled in one of the company's downtown offices, not the main headquarters. She walked into the familiar space with mixed emotions. The same logo she had designed years ago still hung on the wall. People greeted her warmly, some surprised to see her. She wasn't there to reclaim her position, only to offer guidance. Still, part of her missed it. The energy, the purpose, the collaboration. For years, this had been her entire life. After the meeting, as she was leaving, one of the team members mentioned they were looking for an independent designer for a major rebranding effort. She nodded, listening half-heartedly. But when she saw the portfolio link attached in the follow-up email, she froze. The name was familiar. The same name written on that coffee cup. She stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or be shocked. Of all the people in the city, of all the designers in the world, it was him. The man who had bought her coffee. She clicked the link and browsed through his work. It was good, simple, authentic, thoughtful. The kind of creativity that came from observation and heart, not just skill. She felt a genuine smile form on her face. Maybe fate really did have a strange sense of timing. That night, she sat down and wrote an email. She didn't mention the cafe or the coffee. She simply invited him to present his work for an upcoming project at Avantech Innovations. It was a formal message, but there was a trace of warmth in her words, even if he wouldn't recognize it. When he received the email the next day, he almost thought it was a mistake. He'd heard of the company, it was huge. Getting even a small project with them could change his entire career. He read the message twice, making sure it wasn't spam. It wasn't, the details were clear. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. He felt a rush of excitement, disbelief, and nervousness all at once. This was the kind of break he'd been waiting for. He had no idea that the person who had sent that email was the same woman he had once helped in a coffee shop. She leaned back in her chair after sending it, a quiet satisfaction in her chest. Maybe this was the universe's way of closing a circle. Maybe it was just coincidence. Either way, she was glad. In the days that followed, she went about her life as usual. She still avoided the spotlight, but she felt more grounded now. That small moment of kindness had given her perspective, reminded her that the world wasn't just about success or failure, but about connection. And somewhere across the city, he was preparing his presentation. not knowing that the story of his coffee shop kindness was about to come full circle. It's funny how life works sometimes. A stranger's small gesture can ripple into something far bigger than either of them could imagine. And both of them, one trying to rediscover herself, the other trying to build something of his own, were unknowingly walking toward a moment that would change everything again. Because sometimes, the things we do without expectation come back to us when we least expect them, and in the most surprising ways. The day of the meeting arrived faster than he expected. He woke up earlier than usual, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nervousness. It wasn't often that a small freelance designer like him got a chance to meet a company the size of Avantech Innovations. He had checked the directions multiple times, made sure his portfolio was perfectly organized, and even rehearsed his presentation in front of the mirror. But no matter how prepared he was, his stomach felt tight. He took a deep breath and reminded himself of what he always told his clients. Confidence isn't pretending to know everything. It's believing in what you do know. He smiled faintly, hoping it would carry him through the day. The city streets were busy, as they always were. People rushed past him, headphones on, coffee in hand, the usual blur of urban life. But today he noticed everything a little more. The sound of a bus braking, the laughter of two children crossing the street with their mother, the soft hum of morning conversation from a nearby cafe. It was as if his nerves had sharpened his awareness, making him notice life in detail. When he arrived at the building, the lobby was vast and modern. Polished floors reflected the bright morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. He checked in with the receptionist, who smiled and handed him a visitor's badge. "They're expecting you in conference room B," she said politely. He nodded, clutching his portfolio like it was a shield. He walked down the hallway, heart beating faster with every step. He thought about the email he had received days ago and how surreal it still felt. He didn't know who exactly would be in the room, just that they wanted to see his work. And then, in an instant, he saw her. She was seated at the head of the table, reviewing papers, dressed in the same effortless style he remembered. Simple blazer, neat hair, confident posture. Even without her title, there was an air of authority about her. But as soon as their eyes met, recognition flashed across her face. And then a smile, quiet, knowing, familiar. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. He froze, trying to place her face, and then it hit him. The woman from the cafe. The one whose card had been declined. The one whose coffee he had paid for. "Good morning," she said finally, her voice calm but warm. "I'm glad you could make it." He swallowed hard and nodded, words catching in his throat. Yes, thank you for the opportunity," he managed. She gestured to a seat across from her. "Please have a seat. We'd love to see your portfolio." He sat down, placing his folder carefully in front of him, his hands slightly trembling. He opened it and began presenting his designs, explaining his thought process, his inspirations, and the way he approached branding as a story rather than just a logo. His voice gained confidence as he spoke. The nerves slowly faded, replaced by passion. She listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking a question about why he had made a certain choice. She was sharp, precise, but not intimidating. There was a curiosity in her eyes, as if she genuinely wanted to understand his perspective. Other team members were in the room, some taking notes, some observing quietly. But it was clear she was the one guiding the discussion. Her questions were thoughtful and her feedback was constructive. He felt challenged, but in a good way. After he finished the presentation, he waited silently, unsure of what would come next. She leaned back slightly, a small smile forming. "Your work is impressive," she said finally. "It's simple, authentic, and creative. Exactly what we're looking for. But more than that, I like how you think. You don't just design, you tell a story with your work." He blinked, surprised. Compliments from someone of her stature weren't something he had expected. "Thank you," he said quietly, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you remember the morning when you bought a coffee for a stranger?" He froze for a second, a smile creeping onto his face. "Yes, I do. It was nothing, really, just seemed like the right thing to do." She smiled, a little wider this time, her eyes softening. "That was me." His mouth went dry. "You..." He couldn't believe it. The woman he had only briefly met had become the CEO of the company, whose project he was now presenting for. "Yes," she said, still smiling. "I wanted to mention it because it stuck with me. That small gesture, it was simple, but it reminded me that people can be kind without expecting anything in return. And it made me realize how much I value character, not just talent. He felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with pride or success. It was the kind of recognition that came from someone who truly understood the human side of life. I didn't think it would matter, he said softly. She shook her head. It did. It matters more than you know. For the next hour, they discussed the project in detail. She asked questions, shared expectations, and encouraged him to be honest about what he could deliver. Unlike many meetings he had attended, there was no pretense. No pressure to impress. Just collaboration, trust, and focus. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You know, I've met a lot of designers. Some are talented, but it's rare to meet someone who thinks about the person experiencing the brand, not just the product. That's what I like about your work." He smiled, genuinely this time. "Thank you. That means a lot." By the end of the meeting, the decision was clear. She wanted him to handle the entire branding project for their new campaign. It was an opportunity that could transform his career overnight. As they wrapped up, she walked with him to the elevator. "You know," she said, "I didn't expect our paths to cross again, especially like this. Life is funny sometimes." He nodded, still in a bit of disbelief. "It really is." She paused, looking him in the eye. "I want you to know this project isn't just about work. It's about finding people who value honesty, creativity, and kindness. You've shown all three. Don't ever lose that." He felt a lump in his throat. He had never been told something like that in a professional setting, not so sincerely. I won't," he said. As the elevator doors closed, he realized that the moment in the cafe, the simple act of paying for her coffee, had somehow come full circle. That small kindness had led to a connection that changed the course of his career and opened a door he hadn't even dared to knock on. Meanwhile, she returned to her office, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She had taken a step back from her company, from her title and from the spotlight. But moments like this reminded her why she had built the company in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but for people, for connections, for impact. She smiled to herself, thinking about how unexpected kindness can ripple through life in ways no one anticipates. A single cup of coffee, a simple gesture, had led to something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. That night he sat in his apartment, staring at the email confirming the project. He couldn't stop thinking about the meeting, about the woman who had been so calm, so genuine, so human. It felt surreal. He poured himself another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect in the rain-slick streets below. He thought about how life worked in strange, unexpected ways, how a small act of kindness could circle back in ways that changed everything. And for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not just about his career, but about people, about life, and about the quiet, invisible ways we can touch each other's worlds. Somewhere across the city, she was doing the same, reflecting, smiling quietly, feeling that connection. She had been reminded of something she had almost forgotten, that no matter how high or low life takes you, kindness and integrity have a way of finding their path. And as the night settled in, both of them unknowingly carried a story forward, one that had started with a simple coffee and was now turning into something far bigger, something neither could have predicted, but something that would stay with them forever. The project officially began the very next week. He arrived at the Avantech office early, carrying his laptop, sketches, and portfolio, trying to calm the mixture of excitement and nerves that churned in his stomach. The streets were bustling, and the crisp morning air seemed to carry a sense of possibility. He walked through the revolving doors, greeted the receptionist, and waited in the lobby, taking in the polished interior, the soft hum of employees talking, and the subtle aroma of coffee that always seemed to linger in big offices. After a few minutes, she appeared. She smiled as soon as she saw him, her presence calm yet commanding. "Ready?" she asked, a gentle amusement in her tone. He nodded, feeling a little lighter just by being in her presence. "Yes, I've prepared the first concepts for your campaign." "Great," she said. "Let's see what you've got." They walked into a conference room together where a few of her team members were waiting. He set up his laptop and began presenting. The room was quiet, attentive, and professional. He explained each concept carefully, describing the thought process behind color choices, typography, and overall brand storytelling. He noticed her leaning slightly forward in her chair, eyes focused, nodding occasionally. "What do you think about this approach for the younger demographic?" he asked, pointing to a mock-up. She considered it, tapping a pen lightly against her notepad. "It's clever," she said finally. "I like the subtle messaging. It speaks without shouting. But can we make it more inclusive? Think about how different cultures will perceive it. That's something we've struggled with before." He paused, impressed by the level of detail she cared about. Most clients he had dealt with before would accept his work at face value. Here she challenged him to think deeper, not just for the aesthetics, but for the audience. "I can adjust this," he said, feeling inspired. "I think if we tweak these elements, it can work globally without losing the essence." "Exactly," she said, smiling. "I like that you understand that. It's not just design, it's how people experience the brand." For hours they discussed each concept, each possibility, and each detail. He explained why he had chosen certain layouts, why he thought a particular color palette would resonate, and how he wanted the story behind the brand to feel authentic. She listened patiently, sometimes asking questions, sometimes offering suggestions. The conversation never felt rushed or forced. It was collaborative, real, and honest. During a short break, they both stepped out to the hallway. He was nervous, unsure whether to speak casually or keep it strictly professional. She noticed and smiled warmly. "You know," she said, "I'm glad our paths crossed that morning in the cafe." He blinked. "You mean the coffee?" "Yes," she said, laughing softly. "It's funny. That small gesture, it didn't just make my day. It reminded me that there are good people out there. And I realized that when I look for collaborators, I want people like you, honest, thoughtful, and kind, not just talented." He felt a mix of gratitude and disbelief. He had never expected that a single act of kindness could lead to something like this. "I never thought it would matter that much," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It does. It always does, even if we don't see it immediately." The meeting continued after the break, and the next few hours flew by. They refined the concepts, discussed marketing strategies, and even brainstormed ideas for future campaigns. She encouraged him to push boundaries, to be bold, and to think differently. For someone who had been under public scrutiny and pressure for months, her ability to stay patient, thoughtful, and focused amazed him. By the end of the day, they had a clear direction for the campaign. She turned to him, her expression softening. "I want you to lead this," she said, "not just as a designer, but as someone who can guide the story. I want your perspective to shape how people experience this brand." He felt a rush of emotion, pride, relief, excitement, and a deep sense of validation. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Say you'll do it," she said with a gentle smile. "That's enough," he nodded, unable to hide his smile. "I'll do it. Thank you." Over the next few weeks, he worked closely with her and her team. They met almost daily, exchanging ideas, refining concepts, and discussing the broader vision. She treated him as an equal, valuing his input, encouraging his creativity, and trusting him with significant decisions. For someone who had struggled to find her footing in the business world after stepping down, she seemed rejuvenated by this collaboration. One afternoon, as they reviewed a draft of the final campaign materials, she looked at him thoughtfully. "You know," she said, "most people don't get what we're trying to do. They see the title, the position, or the money. But you see the heart behind it. That's rare." He felt a warmth he hadn't expected. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." She smiled a little softer this time. "It's true, and it reminds me why I do what I do. Not for recognition, not for headlines, but for people. People like you, who care about the work and the impact it can have." As the campaign progressed, their professional relationship deepened into a quiet friendship. They shared small moments of humor, subtle jokes during long meetings, and occasional coffee breaks where they talked about life beyond work. She learned about his family, his challenges, and his dreams. He learned about her experiences, her fears, and the weight of responsibility she had carried for years. One evening, after a particularly long day of revisions and brainstorming, she invited him to grab a cup of coffee outside the office. "You deserve a break," she said, "and I think you've earned it." They walked to a nearby cafe, quieter than the one where they had first met. She ordered a latte. He got his usual cappuccino, and they sat by the window. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement outside, casting a warm glow inside. "You know," she said quietly, I didn't expect to enjoy this as much as I am. Work can be exhausting, but moments like this remind me why it's worth it." He nodded. "I know what you mean. I never thought my life would look like this a few months ago. And now, here we are." She smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile. "Here we are indeed. Funny how life works. One small act can lead to something unexpected." He chuckled. "Like a coffee?" She laughed softly. "Exactly like a coffee." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their drinks, watching people pass by, and feeling the quiet satisfaction that comes from connection. It was simple, unremarkable to anyone outside, but for them, it was meaningful. Over the following weeks, the project moved forward smoothly. Their collaboration was seamless, and the campaign began to take shape beautifully. He poured his heart into every detail, inspired not just by the work but by the trust she had placed in him. She encouraged him, guided him, and supported him every step of the way. By the time the final presentation for the campaign was ready, both of them felt a sense of pride. They had created something that was not just visually striking but authentic, thoughtful, and impactful. The team at Avantech was impressed, and the results of the campaign exceeded expectations. The success of the project also changed his life. He began receiving recognition from other clients, invitations for new projects, and respect within his industry. But more than that, he carried with him the knowledge that a small act of kindness, the simple gesture of buying someone a coffee, had played a role in shaping this turning point in his life. For her, the experience reminded her of the power of human connection. She had been under immense pressure, criticized publicly and doubted by many, but in working with someone who valued integrity, creativity, and kindness, she rediscovered what truly mattered. It was a reminder that even in a world dominated by status, money, and recognition, genuine human connections could transform everything. As the months went by, their friendship grew stronger. They continued to collaborate on new projects, but they also shared small moments outside work, coffee breaks, casual conversations, and occasional walks in the city. The bond they had formed was built not on hierarchy or expectations, but on mutual respect, trust, and an understanding that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to ripple through lives in ways neither could have predicted. The story of the coffee, the meeting, and the collaboration became a quiet reminder to both of them that life often unfolds in unexpected ways. That one simple gesture done without expectation could create opportunities, connections, and moments that change the course of life forever. And though neither of them would admit it aloud, both knew that their paths had crossed not by chance, but by the subtle weaving of human kindness, timing, and the invisible threads that connect people in ways they will only understand much later. Months had passed since the campaign had launched, and the results were beyond anyone's expectations. The project had not only strengthened the brand's image, but had also drawn attention in ways that made headlines across industry publications. For him, it had been a turning point. He was no longer just a freelancer trying to find work. He had become a recognized designer, sought after by clients who appreciated creativity, thoughtfulness, and authenticity. Despite the professional success, he remained grounded. He knew that the real reward wasn't the recognition or the money, though they were certainly welcome. It was the journey, the connections, and the lessons learned along the way. Every time he thought back to the moment in the cafe when he had paid for that latte, he realized how a single act, so small and simple, could ripple into something far bigger. She too had experienced a quiet transformation. She had returned to the business world with a renewed sense of purpose. While she had stepped back from her formal position as CEO, she remained a guiding force within the company, mentoring her team, shaping strategies behind the scenes, and quietly influencing decisions. She had rediscovered the value of humility, patience, and human connection, which had often been overshadowed by pressure and public scrutiny in her previous life. One morning, he received a message from her. It wasn't about work, it was an invitation. She wanted to meet for coffee, to celebrate the successful completion of the campaign. He smiled, remembering the first coffee they had shared, and agreed immediately. When he arrived at the cafe, she was already there, seated at a small table by the window. The morning sunlight poured in, casting a warm glow over the table. She waved, and he walked over, feeling a sense of familiarity and ease he had never expected to feel with someone in her position. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Good morning," he replied, smiling. They ordered their drinks, not for formality but simply to enjoy the moment. The conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from work to life beyond the office. She asked about his family, his hobbies, and the projects he hoped to pursue in the future. He listened as she spoke about her experiences, the challenges she had faced stepping down, and the lessons she had learned along the way. At one point, she leaned back and said, "You know, I often think about that morning in the cafe. I wonder if either of us realized how much it would matter." He nodded thoughtfully. "I didn't, I just wanted to help. But looking back, I see now how much that simple moment changed things for both of us." She smiled a little wistfully. "It did. It reminded me that even in a world that's often cold and demanding, kindness can have a real impact. And not just once. It can ripple, affecting lives in ways we don't even notice." He took a sip of his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. "I never expected that one small gesture could lead to this. It's kind of unbelievable." "Life has a funny way of working like that," she said softly. "Sometimes it's the smallest actions that matter the most. They shape our paths more than we realize." For a while they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying the quiet morning and each other's presence. There was no pressure, no expectations, just two people reflecting on how a chance encounter had led to a meaningful connection and changed their lives in unexpected ways. Over the next few weeks, he continued to receive new projects and collaborations, each one building on the success and credibility he had gained. But he remained humble, remembering the simple beginnings of it all. He continued to pay attention to the little moments in life, the acts of kindness, the small decisions, the people he met along the way. She, too, carried the lessons forward. She engaged with her team differently now, valuing not just their output but their character, effort, and perspective. She encouraged mentorship and collaboration, creating an environment where people felt valued and understood. Her leadership was quieter but more powerful, rooted in respect and empathy rather than authority alone. One afternoon they met again, this time for a casual lunch in the park near the city center. The sun was shining, the air fresh, and the sound of children playing in the distance added a lightness to the atmosphere. They talked about future projects, their aspirations, and the importance of balancing work with life. "You know," she said, looking thoughtful, "I sometimes wonder how life would have been different if we hadn't met that day in the cafe. Would I have remembered what matters? Would you have had this opportunity?" He smiled. "I think we would have found our way eventually, but maybe not as quickly." That moment was like a nudge, something small that led to something bigger. She nodded. "Exactly. And it's a reminder that even the smallest choices, the tiniest gestures, can create ripples we'll never fully understand." He looked around at the park, feeling a sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey. It's strange to think that a simple act like buying a cup of coffee could lead to all this. Life really is unpredictable. She smiled, her eyes reflecting warmth and understanding. Unpredictable, yes, but sometimes that's what makes it beautiful. As they finished their lunch, they walked slowly through the park, talking about the importance of staying true to oneself and remembering the value of kindness. They shared stories, laughed at small memories, and enjoyed the ease of connection that had grown naturally between them. Months turned into years, and their professional collaboration continued to flourish. Projects succeeded, opportunities arose, and both of their lives evolved in meaningful ways. But the core of their story, the moment of unexpected kindness the coffee paid without expectation, remained central. It was a quiet reminder of how human connections, simple and genuine, can have a profound impact. He often reflected on the journey, thinking about how far he had come, not just professionally but personally. He had learned that success wasn't just measured by accolades or income, but by the relationships he nurtured, the integrity he maintained, and the empathy he extended to others. She, too, carried the lesson forward. Her experience had taught her that power and position were fleeting, but the way one treated people, the way one valued kindness and collaboration, left lasting impressions. It wasn't about being remembered for titles or achievements, but for the humanity shown in everyday interactions. Together, they had created something beyond just a professional partnership. They had built a connection based on trust, respect, and shared values. And though their lives were busy, Filled with projects and responsibilities, they never forgot the small beginnings that had brought them together. One quiet evening, he sat on his balcony with a cup of coffee, looking at the city lights. He thought about how unpredictable life could be, and how a single, selfless act had set off a chain of events that changed everything. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the opportunities, but for the reminder that small gestures of kindness could create ripples far greater than one could imagine. Meanwhile, she looked out of her apartment window, reflecting on her own journey. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the people who had touched her life in unexpected ways. That simple cup of coffee, a moment of vulnerability and generosity, had reminded her of what truly mattered: connection, empathy, and the courage to act with kindness. Their story became a quiet legend among colleagues and friends, not because of fame or fortune, but because it was a testament to the power of small actions and genuine human connection. And though neither of them sought recognition for it, the impact of that simple moment lived on in the way they approached life, work, and relationships. In the end, what started as a casual act of generosity turned into a lifelong lesson: that the simplest gestures often carry the most profound meaning, that human connection can change lives in ways we cannot predict, and that kindness, when given freely, returns in forms we could never imagine. And so, both of them moved forward in life, shaped by their experiences, connected by a shared story that began with a coffee, and forever aware that even the smallest act can create a ripple that changes everything. It was a story about chance, choices, and the quiet power of human goodness. And as they continued on their paths, it reminded them, and anyone who might hear it, that life is filled with small moments, each with the potential to transform, inspire, and leave a lasting mark on the world.